What's going on, guys? This is Sam, and today I'm going to show you 50 hidden features and other changes in iOS 12. I read your comments on my last video, and I definitely did not go deep enough. First up, on the iPhone 10, there is a cool new Face ID feature. You can see it just failed right there, so when I swipe up again, it should fail. And now we get the option for swiping up to enable Face ID again or entering the passcode. In iOS 11, we only had the option to enable the passcode here, but now we can just swipe up and Face ID should work just like that. Next up, there's also better screenshot rejection on the iPhone 10. Now, this is a mixed bag for me. It's a little bit 50-50, but I've seen some people and websites talking about it. Basically, if you pick up your iPhone 10 and try to screenshot right away, just like I did there, it didn't work because one of the biggest annoyances with the iPhone 10 in general is the fact that it will screenshot if you pick it up sometime. But it does seem to be working quite well on iOS 12, so hopefully that will reduce accidental screenshots on the iPhone 10. In the Control Center preference panel in iOS 12, there is a new option to scan QR code. It will be right around here, so you can tap to enable that. And you might actually not know this. This is a hidden feature that I covered in iOS 11, but inside of the camera app in iOS 11 or iOS 12, you have a built-in QR code scanner. The next feature I want to show you is also in Control Center. You can 3D touch on camera, and there's a new option to scan QR codes in iOS 12. And if for some reason the QR functionality wasn't working on your device, you can just head over to Settings and the Camera Preference panel. There's an option right here to scan QR codes. Just make sure that that is toggled on. This has got to be one of the coolest features in iOS 12 that Apple didn't mention at all. If you have two-factor authentication set up for pretty much anything, I'll hit login, hit save password. Watch what happens. It'll suggest the code right there. Now, normally you would have to remember that code, but in iOS 12, it's smart enough to know it already has that code here, and you can submit it and log in. Now, that's pretty crazy. I use those codes constantly, and the fact that it's here is super exciting. In the App Store on iOS 12, Apple removed the category option for app placement on the charts. So, for example, on iOS 11 right here, this app agenda is number 45 on the productivity charts. On iOS 12, that's just not there. This has also changed a little bit, the ratings. And then also down below, copyright has been moved. In iOS 11, it was at the very bottom. In iOS 12, it's moved up just a little bit. In iOS 12, when you have the low power mode toggle enabled or low power mode is turned on in general, Hey Siri commands now work. So you can see it popped up right there. Next up, this is a legit hidden feature. I can't see this pretty much only if you're digging around in the iOS 12 code. You can find this, but Guilherme Rambo, who's found a ton of stuff in code in the past, found this preference panel that Apple appears to be working on supporting a Face ID enabled, maybe notched iPad in the future. Apple has rearranged the status bar on the iPad in iOS 12 and also added some iPhone 10-like gestures for a device without a home button. When you enable reachability now, there's a new chevron right here that was not in iOS 11. If you drag down, that will automatically take you to Notification Center, and then if you do it again, I tried to play around with it. It just looks like you can change the shape of it by dragging up, so it is responsive, which is kind of neat. Apple tweaked how you swipe for albums in iOS 12. Before, you'd be swiping vertically up and down, but now to view all your albums, you swipe from left to right, which is a change that I feel pretty arbitrary on. Not much benefit here, but it's a little bit different than iOS 11. This next change was pretty hard to find, and it's really, really small, but if you go down to the very bottom of the weather app, you can see it stops at visibility and UV index in iOS 11. In iOS 12, you have an additional line right here that will tell you the air quality index and air quality. The order in which apps are laid out on the home screen has been tweaked in iOS 12. This is how it looked in iOS 11, the default setup. This is now how it looks in iOS 12. While the dock has remained the same, you can see FaceTime has replaced Mail up there, Mail's been moved around, and a lot of apps have just switched places on the home screen. There's also a new Utilities folder right here by default. This is auto-generated if you go to Settings and reset your home screen layout, or I assume if you buy a new iPhone, these utilities, Voice Memos, Compass, Measure, and Calculator have their own special folder now and are no longer just laid out on the second page. If you go into the Notes app to draw something or just take a screenshot to view Markup, when you tap here, you now have pretty much unlimited colors. There are over 120 colors now to pick from in iOS 12. You've got this very cool color picker right here, so you can get like this shade of brown if you wanted to draw something in that super good looking shade. But you can select any of these, a lighter blue, and draw whatever you want in Markup. So that's pretty cool. I like the additional customization here. In the Home app in iOS 12, this icon in the very top left-hand corner of the screen has been tweaked. It was a little like arrow locational icon. Now it is an actual home icon. And when you go into accessories now, this is also changed. In iOS 11, it just said details, which was kind of confusing because I didn't know if I was just viewing like information about the HomePod. And a lot of the times I actually wanted to change settings. You also get easier access in iOS 12 for HomePod to personal requests request option. So you can turn it on and off more easily and also change what kind of authentication you want, if you want it for secure requests only or never. For any of your wallet cards in iOS 12, you now have the ability to turn off notifications. So if I tap on transactions right here, there's no option for it in iOS 11, but in iOS 12, I guess if you don't want to get a notification every time you make a purchase with this card, you now have the ability to disable that in iOS 12. A lot of the next few changes are going to be inside of the Settings app, just because Apple did change a lot in here between iOS 11 and iOS 12. First, notifications. You can tap on any of these applications to view this new feature, but you can change how apps are grouped. You can group it automatically by app or turn off notification grouping for that app entirely. You probably saw this one at the beginning of the video, and I forgot to talk about it when I showed it in a video yesterday as well. Automatic updates in iOS 12. This is a new feature that Apple didn't talk about on stage. If you're somebody who hates updating your phone and you don't want to ever mess with that, it'll hopefully do this in the background or when you'd be sleeping, and then your phone will always be on the latest update and you won't have to do anything to make sure your phone is on the latest update. Apple changed a decent amount under accessibility in iOS 12. First up, for larger text, pretty much anywhere that you'll see a design like this where you have the notch lines and then the main line with something going from smaller to larger or slower to faster. On iOS 11 on the right, it's a little bit thinner, and on iOS 12 on the left, it's a little bit thicker. In accessibility, under switch control and then switches, there's a new option on iOS 12 right here that says always allow USB devices, always allow USB accessories to connect when your iPhone is locked. I'm going to be honest, I don't know exactly what this feature means, but if you're someone who uses these switches accessibility options in iOS, that will hopefully be a good change for you. Inside of speech in iOS 12, the default voice has changed. So if you tap on voices, in iOS 11, it was Samantha, but in iOS 12, it is Siri female in the United States by default. So Apple changed that, and if you listen to the voices really quick, you can probably tell why. This is Samantha.
Hello, my name is Samantha.
And then Siri obviously sounds a lot better.
Hello, my name is Siri.
That's all the new stuff with accessibility that I found, but if we go down below to the very bottom, tap on regulatory, with iOS 12, there are 2 new countries that have been added. iOS 11 stopped at India for the regulatory information, and we've got Samoa and Mexico now in iOS 12. I already talked about the new wallpaper in iOS 12 yesterday. If you want to download it, it's down below in the description, but these 2 sections have been flipped in iOS 12. This is iOS 11, this is iOS 12, and that changed just a bit. For Siri suggestions, Apple announced that with iOS 12, Siri would start suggesting things on the lock screen. If you didn't want to see Siri on the lock screen ever, you can disable that right there. It's a new toggle. In iOS 12, under Touch ID and passcode, there's a new password autofill toggle right here. So if you want to disable that, you can do so. Inside of emergency SOS, the call with side button option in iOS 12 has just been completely removed. That is the default now. I believe the default in iOS 11 was you hold both. Yeah, and then that will come up. So in iOS 12, if you do that, it will pop up like that. Inside of your battery preference panel, this is crazy. There's so much to look at here. You've got an entirely new graph. Very cool, very granular. You can see a lot here, and you can even, tap to see exactly your screen on, screen off, and it'll match with the battery level up there. Inside of passwords and accounts, you can now autofill passwords. Now this looks a little bit confusing because autofill was sort of built into iOS before, but Apple improved the password manager inside of iOS 12. So if I tap on this, I will have to blur some stuff out. It'll ask for Face ID. But for example, right here, I've got some login details. But let's say you don't use this, you use a service like 1Password. It would actually be perfect if this video is sponsored, but they are not sponsoring this video. However, they shared this very cool video that there is a new API coming in iOS 12 that just like you can autofill passwords from the password manager in iOS 12, it also works with third-party applications. The Voice Memos app in iOS 12 got a redesign and some new features. All these features are new in iOS 12. You couldn't change pretty much any settings for voice memos on iOS 11 or before. So these are cool. Permanently delete voice memos allows you to select when you want them to be permanently deleted. You could do immediately 1 day, 7 days, 30 days, or never. Even after 30 days, I don't think I would want my voice memos to automatically delete. So I'm just going to select never. Audio compression quality is huge. It's going to have AAC, which is a smaller file size enabled by default. But if you want that beautiful raw audio from your microphone, go ahead and select uncompress. And then default recording name. That's super cool. The default is recording location when available. And I assume if your location isn't available for whatever reason, it will name it just by the recording number. These are all new in iOS 12, not present at all in iOS 11 or before. Down below in the Maps preference panel, there's not a whole lot going on here, but the background refresh app option is new in iOS 12. Because the measure app is new in iOS 12, we have some options here. Actually, just one option, measure units. We can change from imperial to metric. Still inside of settings under measure, there is some new Safari stuff. First up, and the biggest real change is show icons and tabs. That is disabled by default for some reason, but if you enable it, you get these really cool looking icons inside of your tabs. It'll just be placed on the left next to the name of the page or the website. For Apple, obviously Apple logo. Twitter, you're going to get that. Here's my website. When you go into the tab view, down here, if you tap on advanced and experimental features, Apple added a ton of stuff in here, definitely geared toward WebKit development. So if you want to look at these settings and mess around with them, you are more than welcome to. There also just wasn't a stocks preference panel in the past with iOS 12. You get this, and there's not any crazy settings inside of here. Inside of TV, we've got some options for what apps we choose to connect to TV. This just isn't there on iOS 11. Apple Books in iOS 12 got a really big redesign, and I'll just show you these preference panels side by side so you can see a lot of the settings have been rearranged and shuffled around, and there's just a lot more settings in general with iOS 12. If you listen to any podcast in the podcast app on your phone, you're going to love this next feature. You can customize the forward and back skip buttons. It's set by default to 30 and 15. Let's say I want to skip ahead by 60. If I go over to podcasts right now, you'll see that when I go to my episode, it now shows 60 seconds I can skip ahead and go back 15. So these are completely customizable now. And if you control podcasts with headphones or inside of a car, you can choose to skip instead of go to next or previous. This next feature is really cool when it works. You can search for song lyrics in Apple Music, and potentially the song you're looking for will show up. So I'm going to search for a song by The Weeknd. Wow, it showed up right there. I don't actually want to play that to get copyrighted, but that's very cool. You can search for song lyrics in Apple Music and iOS 12. In Messages, there is now a dedicated Photos iMessage app for all of your photos. You can scroll through them like so. There's also some crazy effects. So if I tap on camera and then click on the effects icon in the bottom left, this isn't the normal camera. You can only do this inside of the Messages app. Watch this. It's a little weird, but I can put an emoji on my face. There's also some other filters you can put on, original, comic book, and it's definitely a work in progress. It's a little bit glitchy, but it is cool for what it is, and it works pretty well. And a very small tweak in iOS 12 is that when you click on one of these options and then expand it, it now says the name of it at the very top. If you go over to your widgets, there is a new screen time widget in iOS 12, which will of course show you how long you've been on your device. And the last change that I want to show you in this video is that the QuickType keyboard now matches the rest of the keyboard. These were a lighter shade of gray before. That was over 50 hidden changes and other features inside of iOS 12. Let me know your thoughts on all this down below. Which one is your favorite? If you enjoyed watching, if you did learn something new, make sure to drop a like down below. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, make sure to hit subscribe as well. If you want to help support the channel, you can head over to shop.iupdateos.com and buy a shirt there, or go over to patreon.com/updateanddonate. That is always appreciated. For now, I've been Sam. I hope all of you are doing great, and I will talk to you in my next video.